Hey there, welcome to DidgieTalks. Today we're talking software release 2019.28.3.1. I got this release about a week or so ago, and whenever I get a software release I do a bunch of tests within the normal operating parameters and outside of the normal operating parameters, which I'll go into in a second. I also read an article which said that this particular release was a big improvement on previous versions, so I was really looking forward to doing those tests. So I went out and did my usual motorway, dual carriageway, navigate and autopilot on and off ramp tests, and the car performed brilliantly, as it usually does these days. I personally couldn't detect any improvements or otherwise in those normal operating parameters, so then I went and did my outside of the normal operating parameters, which is country roads, driving through villages, on autopilot, roundabouts and so on. You may have seen in the previous video that I actually was successful in getting the car to take a left turn off a roundabout and go across a roundabout, literally one after the other. So that was a good show of what the car might be able to do in the future. But these tests are by no means a reasonable way to judge one software release from another, because they are outside of the operating parameters and they really depend on conditions at the time. In fact, in this particular case, the car didn't perform as well as previously. So like I said, you can't really say that that's a step back from previous versions, because it's not actually within normal operating parameters and therefore it really doesn't count. So not a lot to report. Now, the other thing I also noticed was that software release 2019.32 is now out in the wild. I see on my stats app that there's at least one car out there that has that update, and I'm looking forward to that. I'll do some more tests. There's also been an awful lot of talk recently about version 10 coming out possibly at the end of next month, and so with a full version release we would hope and we would expect to see something big in terms of improvements on hopefully autopilot, particularly autopilot, but there'll be a bunch of other things that will come out in that release. So rather than spend any more time on this particular video talking about 28.3.1, what I decided to do instead was take a look at the Tesla Arcade. Now, let's face it, an electric car battery does take longer to charge up than it does to fill a tank of gas. Now, I've done a bunch of videos which actually explain that you don't tend to fill up the tank each time, because if you've got a garage and a charger at home, then you wake up in the morning and the car's got plenty of juice in it. If you are planning a trip, you normally make sure you've got enough juice in there to get you there and back. And if you're planning a trip which goes way beyond the 300 miles that I'll get out of my car, then the car will direct you towards superchargers, or you can stay at a location or a service station or somewhere else where you can plug it in. So there's plenty of ways to get from A to B, even on really long journeys. But on some of those really long journeys, and to stress, I've only had one of those in my 18 months of ownership, but on those really long journeys, you may need to be plugged into a charger for a period of time longer than it takes to fill up with gas. And in these situations, you're probably traveling with your family because you're going somewhere, maybe on holiday or something, in which case you've got a family of kids with you potentially. In my case, that's an 11 and a 12-year-old boy. Now, we can normally keep them occupied with their iPads or their iPhones and a bunch of other things. But in this particular case, I challenged them to test the Tesla Arcade using their Xbox controllers. So they wandered out to the car with an Xbox controller each, armed with a USB cable to plug it in, and I kind of left them to get on with it mostly. So the first thing I had to explain to them was that I did have a USB key plugged in, which I was using for my dash cam and for Sentry mode, and I had to show them how to touch the camera on the screen, wait for the flash, pull out the USB key so to eject it properly in order not to corrupt the files. But apart from that, it was really straightforward. Once that was done, they plugged in their controllers, they've got a USB socket each, and off they went. And I'll run a video in the background which shows that they really just kind of got on. As you would expect, the first thing they went for was beach buggy racing. It's the most visual and colourful of the games currently available, and probably more on par with the kind of stuff they would want to be doing on their consoles or on their iPads or whatever. But interestingly, because I asked them to take a look at all the games that were within the arcade, they started flicking through a few of the others and became quite intrigued. Everything from how the games worked and how to play them, how the controllers affected or were controlling that particular game, because it isn't intuitive, it needed some trial and error. And actually, what I found was after 2 hours of the kids sat in the car playing games, I had to literally ask them to shut it all down and come in and have something to eat. So I know this is not your normal example, because if you were out charging at a supercharger somewhere, you probably would have planned for some of this anyway. The kids are now fully armed. They know what they need to do if they want to be playing games while they're out at a supercharger or on a long journey. But that was through obviously some testing for this video. But other than that, the point really being is that the beach buggy racing kept them occupied for plenty of time. I had to ask them to come off of that and try some of the other games. So that would have kept them going for hours and hours and hours. And we don't spend hours and hours and hours at a supercharger. So that would have kept them well occupied for plenty long enough. But actually, going through each of the games one at a time was also keeping them busy, keeping them occupied. So no problems at all. So actually, if we were set at a supercharger for any period of time, I would suggest that we would be using those games for that period. It would fly by. They wouldn't really notice. They'd probably be fed up when the battery was charged and it was time to move on, because they love playing their games. And yeah, I think that's a really big point for Tesla, and one of those differentiators which really sets them apart from other cars. So well done, Elon and Tesla. Those games are maybe in for some criticism in some quarters because there's been some focus on them, but actually they are useful. They do their intended task to keep you occupied in those situations, and in my findings, actually they used up more time than was ever necessary for a charge of battery. So that was it really. Just wanted to share that with you. Yeah, the games are great. I would suggest carrying a Xbox or PlayStation controller with you and a couple of USB cables, because it just makes it easier for the kids to play with it. They can play it from the back seat of the car or the front seat of the car. And it was a lot of fun. I hope this has been useful. I hope you will get the chance to test the controllers, the USB cables, and keeping your kids busy in your own travels. Do be safe. Do be careful. If you like my videos, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. So yeah, thanks for watching and listening, and go well.